Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session this morning. I heard this morning that we have upwards of 58 registrations of people coming to the seminar, so that's a great turnout. Welcome. We appreciate that you've taken the time out of your busy schedules to come and share this discussion with us. We've had some good feedback from the first session that we held in December related to the general exception process and how best to use it. We thank you for that feedback and thank you for spreading the good news. For those that weren't able to attend that one, there is the ability to see that session, which basically gives a general overview of the exception process. So on behalf of Survey and Spatial New Zealand and Land Information New Zealand, I welcome you guys, everybody, to the seminar this morning. My name's Phil Smith. I'm part of the relatively new Spatial and Requests team at LINZ. So this team came into existence in July last year. And for those that are unfamiliar with our functions, we are responsible for exception requests, hence the reason why we're wanting to present this information to you. We're responsible for the post-approval integration of data sets into Landonline, recording Gazette actions and legalization for legalization data sets. And we're doing some spatial parcel improvement work as well on demand, where people identify areas that in Landonline that need fixing up, that won't require a plan. Also, just like to thank Max Will from Survey and Spatial for helping us to put this webinar together and hosting it on their platform. Appreciate that, Max. I know you're listening. As per the other session we ran, you are able to submit questions to us via the Slido app. We've got Wade and Yvonne here in the room with me, but also from the Spatial and Requests team, and they're going to be moderating the questions coming through. If there's anything that is applicable to the discussion and not too specific, then we'll try and answer it during the discussion. Otherwise, any questions that we don't get to in this hour, we will reply in writing. We'd just like to ask, though, that the questions be pertinent to the discussion. Please stay away from issues of definition. They're probably more suited for a request and probably quite more specific than we can cover today. So what are we going to look at today? Our main focus, of course, is issues around trying to capture and submit data sets that have water boundaries or irregular boundaries. We know this is a big issue. We know that there are many types of situations where users have trouble with the Landonline data. So we wanted to put this session together to give you some guiding principles when dealing with this type of data and what sort of assistance you can expect from us and what we need from you in order to get the best outcome. So we're going to look at some of the roadblocks to the capture process, some of the issues that come up during capture. We recognise, and as you will recognise also, that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for water boundaries. Every data set is different, every part of the land is different, they all have their own characteristics. So it's more a guidance session. We're going to just show you some of the website information on the LINZ website relating to water and irregular boundaries. And in particular, we're going to look at the information on dealing with mandatory mismarks, which can be a real problem. Briefly want to discuss data hierarchy, and I'll just leave that there for now. We're going to have a look at some recent examples, and we're going to review the information that we need from you. Okay, so the roadblocks, some of them are quite apparent, and there won't be any surprises to you. For example, the variable data accuracy in Landonline, probably the most common issue that people find. I mean, this data accuracy variation comes from a number of reasons. Firstly, the origin of the data, and we touched on this briefly in the first session. A lot of the data, especially in the rural areas, is manually digitized, and so we have a number of situations or variables in that process that can create errors. But there may also be errors on old plans. There may have been network adjustments carried out in the system that have altered boundaries, things like that. So there's a wide degree of situations and influences on the accuracy of the data. Second point there, very large hydro parcels. If you're trying to deal with balanced parcels, you sometimes come up with very large hydro parcels. In the past, we have split a lot of these, but still they can be quite an issue. We'll discuss those briefly. Mandatory missed marks, we'll cover that in a separate topic. Again, a lot of those come from historic parcels or nodes that are part of the hydro splitting program that we did. A lot of these mandatory marks need to be assessed when you're actually doing the data investigation. One of the big points for today is the endpoints of irregular boundaries that do not match the definition. If the endpoints are wrong, if they're too far apart, if they're too close together, you're going to have issues with the irregular line, as you've found. So often it's the cases where Landonline is either too short or too long. And in this point alone, we're going to give some guidance around what to look for and when to rely on them and when not to rely on them. So hydro parcels in Landonline that are shown as a single line when they should be a polygon with width. Non-primary parcels needing to intersect water boundaries because you can't capture balanced boundary lines in a data set that only has non-primary parcel. It has to be, we have to split those for you. And just a general thing around Landonline functionality. Some of it's hidden. Some of the really good tools around irregular boundaries are not that apparent. So we'll have a little bit of a look at that. But there's also some good advice on the website and the e-survey guide around that. So with a lot of these roadblocks, the spatial and request team can attend to these through the exception process. However, there are instances where we find that we're not able to due to a complex issue around topology or an issue in Landonline that's not visible, in which case we have LINZ application specialists behind us whom we can call on, and we can escalate the issues through to them. Okay, so just a quick review of the website information. I'll just take you to So from the last session, searching for information on the exception process, just use the term exception in the search box, and it'll take you to the list of the main pages. And just covering off where we were for exception requests. And this is just reviewing what we've done before. So in this page here, gives some guidance around when to use the exception process and when not to. We discussed last time the difference between reactive and proactive exceptions, and a lot of the requests that come through for water boundaries fall into the proactive camp. I'll let you read that at your own leisure. More specifically for irregular boundaries, if you just type in irregular boundaries in the search field, and the results come up underneath. I want to highlight this particular one here, capture irregular boundaries, and with reference to the mandatory and optional missed marks. So this is a good point of reference to come to if you find there are mandatory marks or missed marks on the external boundary, water boundary survey that are causing issues. This article is quite detailed and explains the need to adopt that marking first before you do any digitizing, or ask us to remove it if that's a valid case. So those 2 pages, the exception process and searching on irregular boundaries, will get you to the information in the website. We'll let you browse that at your leisure later, because we want to get into the meaty stuff. So before we get into looking at examples and things, just a bit of guidance around what to look for and what data to use and how to approach water boundaries in Landonline. We've put this little slide in because we really want to get the message across that while Landonline is a representation of the cadastre, it's not always the authoritative record of the correct shape. We always need to go back to the approved plans when any work is being done with irregular boundaries. That's the first point of call. The next level of information and importance is really the physical position of the river. What does it look like on the ground? The Landonline spatial depiction is the last thing you should rely on. Even in urban areas, while we say a lot of it is the coordinates at the end of the lines are mostly survey accurate, we cannot totally rely on the shape of the irregular boundary. And we know that in some cases it's easy to look at the data in Landonline and go, that looks right, when in fact a comparison with the approved plans will show that it may look right, it may not be in the right place. So this is one of the key issues for today, points for today, is Landonline spatial depiction is really down the list when it comes to relying on the shape. So it's important to treat the Landonline data with care and not rely on it in the first instance when comparing old and new definitions. It's important to verify from the authoritative record that the digital depiction is accurate. Just put this in to show that there are different ways different boundaries need to be dealt with. Not wanting to get into definitions so much, but just outlining that accepted boundaries, the depiction of these has to match the source plan, not just what is shown in Landonline. It may be appropriate in this case to use the exception process to have Landonline updated to match the source plan. So even though you're allowed to accept the boundaries, don't rely on what's shown in Landonline to be accurate. Adopted boundaries is necessary to determine if the depiction on the source plan again matches the current position of the water boundary, and also comparing with the physical position, can it be adopted? And better survey fix, I don't particularly want to get into what this means, but this is one instance where Landonline doesn't necessarily need to be changed prior to approval because the new data set is showing us the better fix. There is no value, there's no point, it's actually not right to change Landonline prior to approval because the validation staff need to see the change between old and new. Just a little side note, when dealing with accretion and erosion, there's some excellent functionality in Landonline that works well if the depiction of the spatial boundary in Landonline is correct. It's called Merge Irregular Boundaries, and our 0800 customer support team can help you with the process, but it's dependent on Landonline having the correct definition. So if you're wanting to show areas of accretion and erosion, if the Landonline depiction is correct, then the overlap of the Landonline depiction and the new definition will create an overlap of lines. This system will accurately split those lines and create pseudo-vectors to the nearest marks, which helps with the C472 vector rule. But while this functionality is there, we have to make the point it's dependent on Landonline having the correct definition. So again, if you're doing accretion and erosion, look in the online help in Landonline as well for the instructions on how to do this, or ring the 0800 team and they'll talk you through the process. Okay, so the majority of the time this morning really is I wanted to spend on showing some examples that have come up. And don't be too concerned about all the wording in these. This is just there to give us a flavour for what was asked. And appreciate that some people may recognise these examples. If you do, thank you very much for allowing us to use these. So for the first example, just wanted to show an example of some really good evidence that was given to us in the request, because as we said in the first session, it's all about evidence, evidence, evidence in the exception request. The more detail and more information you give us, the easier it is for us to interpret and make amendments where required, or make a judgment call on what's needed. So in this particular request here, the user had told us where the boundary was captured from, the fact that they'd used field note ties, that there were some marks that clear the boundary, there's erosion, parcel, but things like that, and then asked us, can we match the water boundaries because they were adopting from that plan 96092. And you can see the screenshot on the left is the captured position of the river, similar shape to what we had in Landonline, but Landonline was incorrect. So this is a straight example of where we would shift the river to match the captured position, because the captured position is based on the plans. But when we're doing these ourselves, we will also verify from the original plans that the shape captured is also representative of the underlying plan, since it's an adopted boundary. So this is a case for good evidence, and thank you for that. We appreciate evidence. Similarly with this one, we don't need to read all the wording, but again, Landonline did not have the right shape when they were trying to define a boundary that's based on an adopted plan. The screenshot on the left shows what we had in Landonline, and the screenshot on the right. Based on the evidence that was in the request, we were able to move to the other position, the correct position. And in this case, the survey had given us extra work, showing us, I think, just let me go back. Yeah, where the water line was. This example here is an example where, as part of the exception process, the surveyor had found a mandatory missed mark appearing on the external boundary of the survey along their irregular boundary. And as they say, the mark shouldn't be included in the survey, is actually on the other side of the hydro parcel. So if we have a look at Landonline, this is the situation that they encountered. You can see the digitized boundary, and it actually goes through a node that's on the other side of the stream. There are other issues around the definition of this stream, but this situation highlights what can happen if you find a mandatory mismark, and it needs to be dealt with. It either needs to be adopted into the survey as part of the definition for the new plan, or it needs to be removed or repositioned or attended to. And in this case, further investigation found that there was actually an issue with the data on the other side, where the tie from the peg to the bank had the wrong distance. And when that distance was reviewed and amended, that mark moved off the boundary by 1.5 meters. So it's so important not to just take things on face value or just assume that it's in the right place. If it comes up as a mandatory mismark, we can't always remove it. We'd have to investigate it. A good thing to do is turn on cadastral vectors and see for yourselves if there are any vectors going to it from another plan. With this particular case, what we did was we incorporated all the cadastral vectors on the left side of the river from various data sets that were there and ran an adjustment just to see whether that node would move relative to the rest of the nodes in those plans. But we found that there was actually no movement. This is just a shot from the adjustment tool. Normally, if there was movement, there would be two lines. There'd be a blue line and a green line showing where the node was going to move to. In this case, there's no movement at all. So that flagged to us that there's an issue with that node. So investigation is key in all these circumstances. Right, this is a situation I wanted to highlight where the request itself is not really necessary, even though on the initial look at it, it might appear that work needed to be done with Landonline, and I'll show you why. So the instruction was to please amend the natural boundary to fit our survey as per the attachment. And the surveyor had given us this really excellent diagram showing where the boundary should move to. So this is another key when you're supplying evidence to us. You can attach color images or plots or diagrams to the data set as JPEG files. Very useful for us. Anything like this that gives us evidence or evidence for amendment is appreciated. However, when we looked at Landonline, this is what it appeared. And initially, we look at it and we go, yes, that hydro parcel is incorrect and it's the wrong shape. But this is a case where we would allow the new data set to amend Landonline on approval, with no action required as part of the exception process. The reason being that the endpoints up here and down here match old versus new. So they can be linked up as they are. The other evidence is that the new boundary digitized through here does not cross over into an adjoining parcel. And on closer inspection, neither does it up here. So as these endpoints perfectly match what's in Landonline, and the new boundaries do not intersect a parcel on the other side of the hydro parcel, this can be linked and submitted as is. On approval, Landonline is able to do line replacements and reform the topology of this parcel based on the new definition. Now, there may be questions arise as to what happens with the line on the other side. We'll end up with a big wide hydro parcel. That is quite possible. And in some instances, we will actually, as part of our spatial improvement work, we will actually go and sort that out at a later date, or maybe as part of this request. But it's not necessary entirely for the processing of the CSD. And normally we would leave this boundary for a future survey to come along and rectify. So this is a case where there was really no need for the request, therefore the plan didn't need to be held up. This is an interesting one that came in a wee while ago as well. And if I just bring up this screenshot, it appears to be quite a complex one. What the survey had asked was for a node to be created under this unmarked position here on this boundary, so that to respect the topology. But on investigation, we kind of noticed that in Landonline, the definition of the hydro wasn't that flash, and it certainly, as it came up through the top of the data set, it didn't really match at all. So when we investigated this, we realized that there's no need for us to change Landonline in this case, because the new data set is defining both parcels, both banks of the hydro parcel. So effectively, the extent of the hydro parcel is being redefined. And I'll just go back to this one. So the marks are linked at the bottom, they're linked at the top. The exterior of the survey extends out to the road. Everything on the left-hand side is being defined. So in this case, what we advised was, since you captured both sides of the hydro parcel, please extinguish the existing hydro parcel and create a new one in the parcel list screen. You can then link the new parcel to the captured lines, and on approval, Landonline will be updated. This works in cases like this where the new survey redefines the entirety of the existing hydro parcel. So while it looks like Landonline needs to be amended, if you are defining both sides of a hydro parcel in its full extent, then there's no need for us to amend Landonline prior to submit. Just highlighting the existing hydro parcel only extended between this road and entirely within the survey. This example here is one we'd like to spend a little bit of time on. This is quite a common case that we find where surveys are creating non-primary parcels in the data set that intersect or meet at an irregular boundary. There are no primary parcels in the data set, so therefore we come up with the issue of having to split the irregular boundary where the easements hit. So the survey was really very helpful in saying, I need these points split, and this was what was submitted. Oh, hang on. Oh, that's better. So this is what was submitted. You can see the non-primary parcels and where they intersect at the hydro boundary. So on initial evidence, that seemed like a fairly cut and dry case, but when we looked at it further and did some comparison between the underlying plans that define this river and Landonline, it was noted that there are actually quite some discrepancies there, and it wasn't actually doable to leave the river in that current position, because it would have had effect and did have effect on the extent of the easements. So this is a case where non-primary parcels have been calculated intersecting the XML line, and it doesn't appear that a lot of effort was put into determining whether the actual XML line was in the right place in the first place. So when we did some investigation, we found that the hydro parcel is actually not in the right place, and that this is likely to affect how those non-primary parcels should be shown. just look at it a bit closer. You can see it clearly is off the actual XML now in the right place, is clearly away from the definition, and the easements don't meet. I think this is a really good example for showing that the plan is king. You need to check with the plan and not rely on the XML, especially with regards to water boundaries. So we sent this back and said, well, actually, Landonline had the river in the wrong place. Please reassess the easements. And they came back looking like that. So in that particular area where the easement was split, down in here, because of the old XML definition, now it's contiguous parcel. So this is a really good example of where Landonline irregular boundaries, water boundaries, need to be treated with care. And as per that hierarchy slide earlier, it really is the last on the list after the plan and the physical position. So this was another example that came in where the surveyor was having issues with the waterway going through the survey. And when they tried to link marks down the bottom here, it created overlaps and created significant distortion. And we put this example in because this is another example where the hydroparcel, which extends down to the river, back to the road, can be extinguished and a new hydroparcel created for the definition without us having to change Landonline. Now that does mean an extra parcel in the list, and I guess that means extra fees for that, but in terms of time efficiency, getting the data set in and approved, it's going to pay dividends in the long run. And this example came in asking us to change the water boundaries and to split it and add nodes where the erosion parcels are intersecting. So there's a few erosion parcels in here and through here and through here. One there as well. I just put this one in to show that in this case, as the lines are, the definitions are linked at the top and bottom, and there's no overlap of the new across the river into the other parcels, that there is no changes that are required through the exception process. In this instance, the surveyor is advised us to carry on and allow the post-approval line replacement process to deal with the change in shape. Just going back to an earlier slide, if I may. This one here. While we advise that it's ideal in situations like this where you're defining both sides of the river to just extinguish and recreate, you do acknowledge that when it comes to plan generation, the existing hydroparcel line will be shown in its current position. And the advice there is just pick those lines and hide them. So has anybody got any questions for us at this point in time? Because we've kind of ripped through this pretty quick. Anything they'd like to see again? We'll finish off with a couple of slides. As we said in the first session, it's all about evidence when it comes to exception processes, and the comments that you add are crucial to the effective processing of these requests. In terms of water boundaries, we ask for a few things to be included, and they're listed there. Points like the full description of the boundary being defined. Tell us exactly what it is you're trying to achieve, where it comes from. If you've got a survey report that's already been written to support the evidence, it would be helpful at the exception process stage if that survey report was made available, because there's often very comprehensive explanations to the definition that might help us. If you can advise what reference plans were used to investigate and looked at, that's a good starting point for us as well. And as per one of the examples I showed earlier, any plots or diagrams, either from third-party software or photographs or anything that will help us understand the situation can be attached as colour images or PDF files or black and white TIFFs. In terms of presenting the data to us, sometimes we find that people will leave all the boundaries linked up and then submit it and ask us to make changes. As per the instructions and as per the first session, we would ask that all marks be unlinked, except for those used by control or boundary marks that are already SDC coordinated, because there can be some weight attached to those. Now, just for people who may be new to this, to find out if a coordinate is SDC or survey digitally accurate, the layer is found under marks, NZGD 2000, and then the SDC layer here, and they come up with the pink circles. So those marks can be left linked, but everything else should be unlinked before the exception process is submitted. So we'll just go back to that last slide.
We've got some questions.
So there's just some questions coming through, but I just put this slide at the end, and there'll be takeaway points that you'll all have, hence the question mark for number 4. But from us as a team, number one thing is the plan. The plan is always the plan first. That's the source, hence the model. If water boundary endpoints in Landonline are not SDC coordinates, treat them with care. That's the head and the tail of the fish. If it doesn't match, be careful. And the third, but not the least thing, is evidence, evidence, evidence. That's the chips. So we're just going to answer a couple of questions that are coming through. I trust that some of this information has been helpful to you, and would appreciate hearing back if there's any other information that you would find valuable with regards to the exception processing. All right, got a question here. What do we do if there are large distortions in the underlying data and linking would appear to be distorting our irregular lines? Yeah, a very common question, and this happens a lot, which is why we say treat the Landonline information with care. So the answer from my colleagues here is do not link to the nodes except for one SDC node, as we covered before. Send it in, we will review and update Landonline as required regarding position of the nodes and the boundary lines. So if you've imported and you look around and the data set is linked to control marks, refresh the spatial screen if it looks terrible and it looks like the distortion is going to mess up the irregular boundaries, because if you link the endpoints of an irregular boundary after it's imported and then refresh it, and there's movement on those nodes, Landonline will create a straight line kink at the node out to the irregular boundary. So the other thing to remember is if you have mandatory missed marks in the line along the irregular boundary and you include them at the parcel linking stage, it will also right line your digitized boundary, which is quite annoying. So that's why we say when you import the XML, link the control, refresh the screen, view the distortion. If it looks like it's going to create issues, send it straight in and we'll assess the position of the XML data. So yeah, thank you for that question. What to do if there's large distortions in the underlying data and linking would appear to be distorting irregular lines? Do not link. The answer is do not link to the nodes except for one SDC node. We'll review and update Landonline as required regarding the position of the nodes. Thank you for this question. These questions will be, and the answers will be provided to you all in written form after this. So we've got a question here. If a surveyor submits line work in the exception based on field notes and fixes, how far will LINZ staff go to verify? Well, we take that information very seriously and we would use it to make sure that the spatial position of the boundary is correct. We would trust that the field notes, if you provide copies of them, would be ideal. If not, even just the references to them, we can retrieve those field books and verify that the information that you provide is correct. In some cases, it might actually be prudent to, if you can, and it's in maybe the model, is to include some of those fixes in the initial submission of the data. Have instances where there's been quite complex situations with water boundaries and the surveyor has come back and provided from their model extra data based on those fixes that we're able to use as well. So if you can help us in any way like that, it is useful. When you're submitting a data set for exception, if there's a lot more data in there than you intend to submit, that's not a problem at the exception stage. Anything that we can use is helpful. You can then, once we send it back, you can remove the data that's not required for definition. But yeah, so we will verify that. Thank you for that. So I've got a question here. What do we do when hydroparcel is linked at both ends, but the boundary overlaps the XML or current spatial definition of the property on the other side of the water boundary? So this is a good question, because we would be relying on the surveyor to tell us whether there is an actual encroachment of the water boundary into the title on the other side, or in their investigation have they determined that Landonline is incorrect, like it might be a distortion or a displacement in the shape. So if you do get a hydroparcel like that and your new definition basically bisects the water boundary, advise us. But also, in terms of evidence, let us know where your definition comes from. Because there are some cases where it may be an encroachment and you may need to extinguish the hydroparcel and deal with the balance either side, but that's very rare in our experience. I hope that helps. I just want to say thank you for people that have submitted those questions. There's some good, insightful questions there, and we will provide the questions and the answers and make it available to everybody for your benefit. So I just want to say thank you. Does the team want to say anything at this stage? No, cool. Just want to say thank you to everybody for taking the time out. Thank you for listening. And we're happy to receive feedback, or if you've got questions, email them into customer support and attention the spatial and request team. That would be fine. Otherwise, apart from that, have a good day.